Ah, the 2000s. What a wonderful period for people that lived in modern society. Things were still kind of simple, and sure, there was a crazy war happening in the Middle East and the economy was becoming a bit scary, but it was more or less simple living. At this time, the internet was still a place rather than something that was deeply intertwined with our lives, and as such, it was steadily blossoming into the expansive creative outlet that it is today. Or, well, that it was briefly. People were flocking to various websites to try their hand at creating entertainment products to be consumed and enjoyed by random folks on the internet. This was all following in the wake of success by James Rolfe as the angry video game nerd and Doug Walker as the nostalgia critic. These two laid out the groundwork for the supposed gold standard for critiquing video games and movies. Everybody has opinions on the many moving parts of life, and also the slower, more refined, pleasurable points as well. This is where human expression can get really exciting, because we can divulge in a variety of topics, sharing our various ideas, and find new perspectives based on the input of people who have differing views. Now granted, for every person whose opinions you may hear, there's an alarming percentage of people that'll beat you over the head with the stupid ideas that are just floating around in their water-filled noggin. It's safe to assume that every person you meet will eventually detail at least part of the idiotic side of their personality. Nobody's exempt from being foolish on at least one subject. With the rise of internet critics, commentary channels, and the seemingly universal push for anybody and everybody to say what's on their minds, we've seen a steady increase of online personalities that try to capture the magic of it all. People that are capable of compiling their thoughts, jotting them down in a concise and easily understood manner, transforming these thoughts into fully produced videos where you, the viewer, could potentially be swayed into sharing the same opinion. If nothing else, you'd at least be entertained. For every quotable notable that makes their name known, there will always be people following the most renowned of these types of creators, coming down to the classic issue of imitation versus emulation. In case you're not aware of how the two are different, allow me to explain this for you. Imitation is when somebody copies something directly. This can usually be seen in ways like how somebody talks, the way they structure their ideas, how they present themselves, that kind of stuff. There's always going to be a little overlap between some folk because very rarely is anybody truly unique. But basically, it's when someone is trying to be like someone or something else. Emulation, however, is when somebody is able to recognize the style of something, or the end goal of an idea, and approach it in a similar fashion with some level of change. You can think of this as more of somebody taking inspiration from a concept rather than outright stealing. This is a nuanced topic and sometimes confuses people, but that being said, not every person who's trying to get involved in something that has already been done is guilty of outright thievery. In fact, today's topic is a strange case where emulation ultimately led to someone making a major fool of themselves. You'd expect imitation to lead to more dire consequences for somebody, or at least a sizable amount of scrutiny, but in some rare cases, emulation can actually progress into somebody trying to innovate an idea in a way that is unnecessary and not beneficial. But really, how could somebody see the success of others and not recognize why that person was able to pull something off? Is it a disconnect? Did they even pay attention? Do they even care? Who could be like this? Who would do such a thing to themselves? Bob Chipman, known better by his online web handle MovieBob, is an online critic renowned for being a total idiot. Starting in 2008, making him one of the earliest and most prolific members of the League of Autistic Media Reviewers, Bob has spent years building up an empire of fans since his debut. His content wasn't anything too terrible. It certainly was a product of the time, but it was also nothing that would leave a lasting impression on you. One glance at his work and you could see the direct inspiration from other winners of his field, but it's hard to discern him from other channels that are just riding on the coattails of other creators who are making bigger moves and getting all the mainstream attention.
Bunnyface says somebody saw a video creature down by the pier, so now I've got to go check that out. Plus, I've, got to do the actual episode. Unless you wanted to help with that, too.
I don't know. What's the topic?
The 1-year revisitation of Other M.
Ha! You're on your own with that one, sir.
Bob, much like other creators, adores his media. He loves to consume. And really, who doesn't? I absolutely jump at the opportunity to be disappointed by products that I allowed myself to be tricked into spending my money on. I am eternally grateful to Bob and the other slew of critics who were there to help me form my opinions when my brain was too mushy and unreliable to form its own thoughts. Bob's YouTube account was created on May 14, 2006, just about 2 years after he would create his first Game Overthinker video. The channel wasn't anything to talk about initially, because he just used it as his personal YouTube account. He posted videos that were focused on gaming, but they were usually just unfunny edits or attempts at jokes that didn't go anywhere. One upload from this period was this crunchy modified version of the Halo 3 Believe diorama trailer, where he superimposed Mario holding the severed head of the Master Chief. What does this mean? Was it some kind of silly gag that didn't have too much of a punchline beyond just, hey, look at this adorable Italian man from a children's video game stand before a gruesome battlefield? Or maybe this is a sign of things to come, like some kind of allegiance to an idea, a message that he's trying to subtly convey to the audience. Perhaps, just maybe, in some way, he was a fervorous fan of Nintendo. I suppose it's not a bad thing to enjoy their games, but still, a weird video that almost feels foreboding in retrospect. Bob continued to make content for a while, appeasing no audience and blending in with the sea of nobodies, posting aimlessly until about February 12, 2008, when he uploaded his first Game Overthinker video. This upload started out humbly, with him immediately addressing the elephant in the room. Why should anybody be concerned with the things that he was going to say in his video? And what exactly set him apart? He knew going in that the market, even if it was small by today's standards, was already oversaturated and likely would get worse as time moved forward. Instead of sugarcoating his words and finding some civil way to present his points, he instead opted to go for this brusque, kinda rough demeanor. Like he had an attitude and wasn't afraid to show it. A bad boy who plays video games, if there were ever such a thing.
I thought about starting this off with some sort of introduction, but honestly, you don't care. Many thanks if you were pretending to care anyway, but we both know you don't. Your first question is not who is this guy, but rather what sets this guy apart from every other fucking game culture video rant guy on the web, and rightly so we'll cut to the chase. So, like a lot of gamers, I'm currently in the midst of having my world rocked by Suda51's No More Heroes, the first fully awesome third-party title for the Nintendo Wii, and as far as I'm concerned, both an early contender for the top games of a waitlist, and a welcome fellow to Portal and Bioshock in the pantheon of wonderful new blood ideas for this console generation. And yes, you heard me, you half-cocked message board fuckheads. The Wii is part of this console generation, even though it's not giving you a base tan with bloom lighting and forcing you to go plasma in order to derive the proper enjoyment from otherwise rote rental-worthy rehashes, alright?
The topic of this video is the state of the gaming industry in the late 2000s. Gaming was making a shift towards realism, or at least what was achievable with the hardware at the time. Movies and games were being affected by a sweeping fad of darker visuals, themes, topics, you get the idea. Stories weren't as often being built around something cute or quirky, like things you'd see in old games or a Saturday morning cartoon, but rather we're seeing an uptick of human characters that were semi-grounded in reality, relatable, and affected by the human condition. While on one hand, it's understandable that he longed for a time that has since passed, there are certainly no issues with the games that he liked from when he was a kid. He just failed to see that what was popular at the time wasn't necessarily built for someone like him. The games he enjoyed had released, had their time, and now they're done. Mostly. You guys know how some franchises just refuse to die. However, on the other hand, just because the heyday of this type of fun has come and gone doesn't mean that those games are no longer in existence. It's granted that the physical format they're printed on may disappear or run away with age, but rest assured the games that brought him so much joy in his youth will never truly die. His memories will live on, and the products will in some form as well. He took issue with the lack of color variety in the visuals of said games. Like I had mentioned, things were taking a darker tone, colors were being used less, or at least were being utilized in ways that made them stand out more. If a game made a lot of use out of desaturated colors like faded or dark greens, browns, grays, that sort of thing, that just meant that the ultra colorful and vibrant stuff would stand out more. This doesn't mean that every single grungy game would or could make vibrant colors part of their art style, because there's no denying that some games just revel in a shade of perpetual poo-poo brown, but there were also games that had fantastical visuals. For example, he shows screenshots of Halo during his video, and there are absolutely segments of these games where colors are muted or carefully removed to sell a mood, but it's intellectually dishonest for him, a gamer who we're supposed to be considering the opinion of, to lump the franchise into the same box as the generic FPS stuff he mentioned prior. If you go and look up footage of any Halo game up to the point of this video's release, as Halo 3 was the latest entry at that time, you'll see how saturated and visually stunning the use of colors are. Deep purples for alien technology, vivid blue skies covering bodies of water, neon greens and pinks and reds popping out of laser weapons, and who could forget the vibrant glowing blood of the grunts and other Covenant species. Even if the games had sections where striking visuals were used less, each entry in the series made dazzling use of color theory. I'm not gonna gargle the balls of Bungie here, even if I do enjoy the old Halo games, but I think it's concerning that he'd come out swinging with a really stupid opinion like that. He was either intentionally trying to say something ignorant as a means of getting the viewer's attention, and by golly did it get mine, or was he unfamiliar with the games and just made baseless assumptions? Because who was going to stop him?
If you go grab a random copy of any big, massively popular hit recent video game, you've got a really solid chance of encountering the following. It's going to be a fucking first-person shooter, so your character will largely consist of a disembodied hand holding a gun, and the lead hero, if and when you do see him, is going to be a scruffy, unshaven white guy with a disaffected tude, or his cousin, presumably scruffy, unshaven white guy, now wearing space armor. For some reason, somewhere along the line, we went from video game heroism being a profession diverse enough to include plumbers, hedgehogs, robots, cavemen, ninjas, and whatever the hell Kirby is supposed to be, to a field monolithically staffed by guys who are all doing their best to pull off the look of self-employed landscaping contractors.
So one of characters are basically blank slates in a lot of ways. This allowed people to project themselves onto the characters. You know, like have the character be a vessel for the player. It just makes too much sense for him, I guess. And wouldn't you know it, he had to bring up the Bionic Commando reboot. I get it, that wasn't what everybody was looking for, but you have to account for what was going on at the time. Yes, this was a major departure from the original visuals, but this was their attempt at trying to modernize it for a new audience. The original games are still there and you can still enjoy those, and it's totally fine to not like the direction that something is going toward. But he comes off as somebody who just dismisses something because he doesn't initially like the way it looks. He doesn't even appear to want to give something a fair shake. Who knows, maybe if he played the game a bit, he'd actually like it. But no, it's easier to just dismiss something because you don't like the color palette and the visuals. What a fucking baby.
A few months back, Capcom gave old-school gamers like myself the world over a Seismorian-level affliction of acute priapism by announcing that they'd be revisiting the world of Bionic Commando, a one-off NES-era classic rightly remembered as the motherfucking masterpiece and one of the best things they ever made. High praise considering this was Capcom at the apex of its Mega Man-era grandeur and only a few years away from its Street Fighter-era grandeur. The game featured super spy badass Rad Spencer fighting through elaborate, colorful levels, battling the armies of a revived Adolf Hitler, no, really, fucking Hitler, cheaply through the use of his awesome telescoping bionic arm, hence the title. It was G.I. Joe meets James Bond meets Spider-Man meets Mega Man. Pure, concentrated awesome. So you can imagine how excited we were to return to form. And then we saw it. Yeah, fine, swinging around on the arm looks fun, we've known that since Spider-Man 2. But where are we doing it? Wow, washed out beige-brown ruins. Sweet, because that look totally hasn't been done to death in every fucking serious game since Doom.
Something interesting to note with this video is that he brings up another major contention in the gaming industry, but only treats it with a passing, almost favorable regard: Nintendo's business model. He brought up that Nintendo had begun stagnating around this time, even after the tremendously positive reception of the Wii. Nintendo had, at this point, entered a period of perpetual repetition. While they were doing their usual thing and finding ways to innovate the home entertainment market with their proprietary doohickeys and whatchamacallits, they were also putting out games that failed to stand out from the previous titles. This isn't too bad, and it's also a very broad generalization on my part, but hear me out. Most Nintendo games at this point followed a very specific formula. They take the base idea of a product, usually something that was established within the first few entries, and tinker with that idea in a specific way. In some cases, this adds a new layer to the experience and builds upon the already existing strong base. Think of how Mario 64 played, and how that eventually transformed into Mario Sunshine some years later. Similar gameplay, similar principles, but refined. This wasn't a problem in and of itself, but eventually Nintendo hit a wall of sorts. They were changing things, but stuff didn't feel all that different. This was franchise fatigue for the most part, and unfortunately it seems that Nintendo is still stuck in this rut to some degree. Not that they haven't put out good games since, but they're certainly just chugging along. Bob seems to be accepting of this because at least it's something he understands from his childhood. An idea from his youth was able to survive alongside him by making small, almost insignificant adaptations to his design. He's only comfortable with tiny changes, which is why he didn't like how the gaming industry went from playing as gladiators, barbarians, pirates, ninjas, and plumbers to emotionally driven, focused, and rounded, typically male characters that have struggles and depth. The change is too harsh from when he was a kid, and therefore he cannot like it. He does give praise to BioShock for its stylization of the darker visuals and commended Assassin's Creed for trying to represent a historic time period as accurately and realistically as possible, but grown to the accomplishments of games like Halo, Grand Theft Auto, Half-Life, Mass Effect, etc.
It's times like this that make me grateful for game designers who actually take care of their properties. Say what you will about Nintendo and Shigeru Miyamoto's tendency toward re-release and repetition, at the very least we've never had to suffer through Link's emo phase. Look, I'm not saying abject realism and non-surreal design don't have a place. The unifying dark Art Deco consistency of BioShock is part of what made it work, and I appreciate how determinedly Assassin's Creed sticks to a semblance of history in its vision of the Crusades. I just like to see invention and variety once again be the rule instead of the exception. Is that too much to ask? Designers, give it some thought. Instead of blasting away the Nazis again, how about some mummies? Instead of yet another gravelly-voiced macho hardcase to save us from the alien herd, why not say a monkey? See, that would be a place to start from. Start asking yourselves at the beginning of every character creation brainstorming session, hey, could this be a monkey? Maybe you won't end up with a monkey specifically, but at least you'll start off in a more creative direction, and I can almost guarantee that whatever you settle on will be a more immediately compelling character than Master Chief.
Something that really stands out to me is the intro, showcasing whatever characters he identifies with, alongside a huge American flag with bold text that reads, MovieBob, proud to be an American, prouder to be an American geek. I'm sure any women currently watching or listening just felt their crevasse seal up and retract into themselves a bit. It's not a bad thing that he's proud to be an American. I mean, lots of people take pride in the happenstance of where they're born. It's not even a bad thing that he's into nerdy shit. I can't fault the guy because I'd be a huge hypocrite for it. But I think there's something to be said about the way he presents himself. Sure, I'm one to talk, but there's just this painful level of cringe that's just oozing from this. Maybe it wasn't seen as goofy as it is now, but this certainly makes the video stick out as more of a goofy sideshow that should be gawked at, rather than some kind of reputable thing. But, given that his moniker is MovieBob, he also discussed movies just as you would expect. Now, consider the following. What would be a good first topic when it comes to trying your hand at reviewing films? Maybe a classic, or maybe a popular film that just released, or maybe something that fits your interest specifically. Bob decided that his first review, if you can actually call it that, would be centered on the Sex and the City movie. His review was released on June 8, 2008, and was about as insightful as his previous gaming rant.
Sex and the City is the continuation of an HBO series and tells the story of four promiscuous, fashion-conscious gay men living and working in Manhattan. In what can only be described as a metatextually rich conceit of oddball casting, the four gay men in question are in fact portrayed on screen by three women, and one high-tech plasticine alloy-skinned cyborg built to resemble actress Kim Cattrall circa 1986. Coincidentally, has anyone seen the real Kim Cattrall lately? And if so, how's she looking?
Now, I'm not trying to be judgmental or anything, but I don't think he was the target audience for this film. I'd have to assume that the movie was made with women or gay men in mind, so perhaps him trying to give his opinion on this flick is null and void. Yeah, sure, anybody can have an opinion on anything, but I think it's unfair for somebody whom the film was definitely not made for to give an unfair verdict on the quality of the product. Perhaps this speaks more to his prowess of deciphering film. I know there's a lot of people out there that consider themselves to be movie buffs and have researched motion pictures extensively, breaking down plots and cinematography and what have you, as if it's some kind of elaborate field of science. It's impressive, but respectfully, all of Bob's analysis comes from a place of acute anger, like he's lashing out at Hollywood for making an abomination that he can't handle.
Now, I'm clearly not the audience for this sort of thing, and I know that because the media has been telling me so as part of a months-long build-up to the movie, as part of a concerted effort to make sure that any negative review coming from a male critic can be easily ignored. But I was curious to see it, if for no other reason than all the talk of Warner Brothers guarding the secret plot details. All told, I'd say they did a pretty good job of hiding them, as I've now seen the movie, and I still don't know what the plot was. Something about a wedding, shoes, and men being pigs. And please don't even fucking start. Yes, I've seen the show, but I lost interest right around the time Cattrall's character removed her head from betwixt the loins of the chick who played Theo's hot teacher on The Cosby Show.
His main gripe with the movie, other than the fact it was made for women or something, was that it failed to feel like a feature film. According to a synopsis, every 30 minutes or so the protagonists would reunite over some drinks and discuss the happenings of the previous chunk of the story, which made the movie feel more like a series of episodes rather than a single continuous narrative. Now, I mean this with all of the kindness in my black little heart, but what the fuck does he think the movie would be about? Does he really think that the series would have been strong enough to withstand an hour and a half of a single plot? Furthermore, if there's several protagonists, this allows the movie to dedicate a slot of time for each character. I don't know, I've never seen the movie and I have no intention of doing so, but I do think he's being unnecessarily unfair.
Basically, the whole thing is organized into a handful of serialized vignettes with a couple longer overarching plot lines. About once every half hour, the four main girls sit around enjoying some sort of colored liquid intoxicant and rehash the story in more scatological terms than the rest of the film. In other words, it does everything in its power to feel as much as possible like a bunch of episodes crammed together all at once. Kind of like back in the 80s when they'd stick a 5-episode story arc from a cartoon or something and release it on tape as the movie.
By this point, it had become increasingly clear that Bob's raunchy nature was something to behold. Unlike a lot of other creators who at the time were setting up elaborate skits and finding ways to explain their thoughts and feelings in a cohesive manner, Bob tried to treat his work as a refined version of a stream of thought. Well, yes, it's undeniable that he was writing out a script and attempting to make something that was engaging and funny. He framed his videos in a way where it sounded like your kinda dickish buddy is explaining his thoughts on what's currently playing on the TV. I can't deny that, at least with his older content, like the stuff from around this period, there's something strangely endearing about what he had put together. While his execution feels dated even for the time period, it still feels oddly comforting to sit through. If he was capable of keeping up with this kind of momentum and back-to-back jokes, even if they weren't all that funny, he could have done quite well for himself. There was no way in hell that he'd ever outdo his contemporaries like AVGN or the Nostalgia Critic, but he offered his own brand of commentary that stands on its own. Mostly. I can't hate the old stuff, but as with everything else on the internet, things only got more lame as time moved forward. MovieBob's products are definitely not an exception. Bob's videos were undergoing a decent reception overall, as while many people were turned off by his seemingly facetious hostile nature, he also got people rallying behind him who understood the angle that he was using. He was at least notorious enough to get the attention of Escapist magazine, a once reputable source in gaming news. Bob was a fan of this publication when it was still doing fine work, and managed to work out a deal with them to produce a little segment for an upcoming show that they were throwing together. Bob made sure to post about this on his Game Overthinker blog site, hyping up the magazine while also boasting about his upcoming collaboration with them. He immediately expressed his desire to not only do this again, but to make it something more habitual. This was a grand opportunity for him to get more involved in the business, so surely he'd make a good first impression, right? His post reads, quote, "Anyway, the Escapist show features along with its regular content and contributors short humor segments provided by independent web guys, and next week, episode number 2, tentatively planned to air on November 4th, the contributor will be me. I'll be doing a movie review. Can't tell you which movie yet. Cool, no? I encourage everyone to check this out, especially all you Game Overthinker fans, since it's your enthusiasm for my goofy content that's had a lot to do with me getting noticed at this level. I cannot thank you guys enough. But don't just see it from me. The series is really good and off to a great start. And if you like seeing my stuff on there, send some feedback over to Escapist telling them so, and maybe I'll get asked to come back for more. Look for it next week." This eventually transformed into an ongoing business relationship where he'd create exclusive content for Escapist. This was a pretty lucrative opportunity for him, as Escapist had yet to destroy its reputation, and the same could be said about Bob. Even if most people weren't impressed by the things that he was uploading, he was still bumping shoulders with noteworthy folks and made the right moves to get himself in a profitable position. In fact, Screw Attack had become aware of MovieBob's moves in the gaming commentary field. Screw Attack had soared into popularity after becoming the exclusive host for the Angry Video Game Nerd until the series' departure to Cinemassacre in 2011. For anybody that was trying to get into this field, this was like a dream come true. If Bob played his cards right, he'd be working alongside some of the most influential figures on the internet, and he'd possibly help shape the culture around the topic. Bob actually won a Screw Attack contest to become one of the other major figures for the Screw Attack show as the Game Overthinker. He'd be featured at their conventions and in the top of their contest and so on and so forth. For a guy that was making crass and brusque videos without much in the way of preparation, he was doing quite well for himself.
Perhaps you could elaborate a little further for the nice people?
Sure. Although your primary function is to provide commentary on games and game culture, about a year ago you were attacked by the Anti-Thinker, your evil double from an alternate universe. You defeated him, but the battle ripped a hole in the space-time continuum, allowing creatures and powers from the video game world to cross over into the human world.
He'd attend their conventions, get to meet fans and sign autographs. It really seemed like he was going places. The internet was still a separate place from the real world, and this was one of those rare times when the virtual plaza of the information superhighway had begun to leak out into reality. Prior to this, people were only famous for being involved in high-dollar productions or doing political stuff or something along those lines. But the internet had ushered in a new paradigm for human expression. Anybody could come along, share their thoughts, and find unexpected fame and success waiting for them. I mean, check out this post from his recollections of SGC 2010, where he details how he's been on Cloud 9 because he was being treated like a celebrity. Here's a question I never would have imagined I'd have an answer to. What does it feel like to have beautiful women dressed up like anime video game characters asking you for a photo and autograph? Answer: it feels pretty fucking awesome. Honestly, easily one of the top 10 weekends of my life. Meeting fans from as far away as England and Portugal, signing autographs, doing a panel with Spoonie, GPX, and the Life and Level guys, hosting my own Q&A panel, watching it get fuller with time, and being applauded for broad references to Babylon 5, being invited up on stage with the actual Screw Attack crew, improvising a debate with the Game Underthinker, meeting Keith Apicary, Brental Floss, the Angry Nerd, and the whole crew in the flesh, being treated like a goddamn rock star, or at least moderately noteworthy musician, for posting jokey videos on the internet. Epic. There's just no other word for it. More in-depth type stuff to come out. But for now, wow. Just wow. Now that he was getting involved in the big leagues, this meant that he was going to have to up the ante for his content production. Haphazardly recording himself in his closet while nearly chewing on his microphone might have gotten him to where he was now, but there were expectations that he'd have to meet now that he had employers. Not to mention, he kinda looked amateur in comparison to the other people that he was working alongside, with them recording live-action segments and having storylines and enhanced visuals, you know, at least from what we saw people making at the time. Bob had two options: keep doing the thing that got him his success at the cost of being forgotten due to innovations by his peers, or adapt to the changing landscape of video creation. Bob carefully considered what he should do next, and after much deliberation decided to follow in the footsteps of his peers by pointing a camera at himself. Much like the ever-illustrious Brett Keane, Bob was on the heavier side and opted to wear an overcoat to make himself look like an imposing tough guy, which is funny coming from me considering I use a stylized PNG to represent myself.
Had enough?
LOL, a retro gamer. You are to King Noob, and your hat was hella gay.
You shouldn't use that word as an insult.
OMFG, why you be so politically correct?
It's not politically correct, it's just polite.
Negative, you are white knighting, so camgirl feminazis will send you pics.
My god, Omega Thinker wasn't kidding. You really are everything that's wrong with online gaming wrapped up in one metal shell.
By the time these silly little live-action segments were things in Bob's content, things started to get a little weird. The biting commentary was still there for better or worse, but the strengths of his content were starting to fade. While he was always a heavy-set guy with average to below-average looks, it didn't matter much because we didn't see the face that was spitting out the possibly disagreeable opinions, which made him easier to disregard when he said something dumb. There's something much more impactful about dumb opinions when you see the person making them, because you can finally put a face to the idiotic statements, making their comments exponentially more cringe-inducing. These skits were very much a product of the time. I can't really fault the guy who was just emulating what his constituents were doing with varying success, and for what it's worth, the skits were at least kind of funny. Maybe not humorous because of the jokes he was trying to shoehorn into his content, but rather they were visually engaging. Sometimes things look funnier than they really are, you know what I mean? The skits were sometimes mocked for their mediocrity, especially when compared to what Doug Walker, James Rolfe, and others were doing with varying levels of work. But overall, he was still considered to be a notable person in the pack of game and movie reviewers.
Previously on the Game Overthinker, the anti-thinker returned, but not for long.
So, what am I supposed to call you, future man? My name is Clogs. Clogs Shoes. In my time, they call me Omega Thinker.
The standards back then were low enough that pretty much anybody who had enough free time and resources could pass the bar for entry and make this type of stuff, but viewers only really latched onto a select few. There were too many copycats at the time, such as the irate gamer, but MovieBob somehow survived any level of criticism that was made against his niche. As his popularity grew, he started to see himself as more of a celebrity. I mean, yeah, he was technically a celebrity on some level, people knew who he was and he had fans and he was getting paid for his time and all that stuff, but he wasn't as big as he thought, and he gradually started to develop a toxic personality because of this. Or perhaps this just shed light on his true colors. There was a point where it felt like he was no longer playing a character, and in fact it was turning into some kind of self-servicing power trip for him where he could blubber in front of a camera, say bad words, and expect his fans to clap at the same jokes over and over. It was only a matter of time before people would start to notice the flaws in his presentation, and his extremely fragile ego that acted as fuel for his operation. Bob was quite active under the Escapist, and for what it's worth, which admittedly is not much, he's tried his best to put out a slew of different content. The Game Overthinker, as we've already discussed, was his attempt at dipping his toes in the same niche as other more talented people. Dressing up in costume, telling a long-form story through minutes-long skits that go nowhere, hounding on jokes that never land. More often than not, it felt like he was just filming home movies by himself while wearing costumes that he got from a dollar store the day after Halloween. The Big Picture, Bob's main series where he reviewed movies from no particular background or time period. This is essentially the same thing as the Game Overthinker, but without the pointless side plots that didn't add anything to the video. You'd assume that trimming the fat and focusing more on the commentary would mean that these videos would be better, but you'd also be dead wrong. Pretty much all of the same issues from the first series carry over, because the person behind the show is adamant that you listen to his vehemence for fictional stories. He also had a similar series called That Good, which was essentially the same thing, but instead he just praised a movie that was very popular because, well, it's good. Oh, and how can I forget In Bob We Trust, which is basically his way of trying to parade himself as a voice of reason in a world that can't be tamed. You know, like his opinion is the only one that actually matters. For the most part, he seems to believe that pretty much anything that comes out in modern times is total horseshit unless there's some kind of appeal to his personal politics. For example, he loathed the RoboCop reboot because the main character was simple and not charismatic, but revered the horrendous Ghostbusters reboot from 2016 that was unanimously hated by the Ghostbusters fanbase and rational people alike.
So given that, how'd they do? Not half bad, actually. As a matter of fact, save for a handful of extremely annoying faults mainly pertaining to structure and technique, the new Ghostbusters comes frustratingly close to being maybe the best possible version of its own stupid idea.
What set MovieBob apart from his peers was this looming feeling of something coming. Some comments on his older content indicate that people could smell that something was afoot. I suppose the fishy stench was just too pungent to ignore. Bob had been making content for years, and while other people soared to popularity by just recording themselves being goofy and talking about whatever media they choose, he had yet to see the larger mainstream success that other creators had attained. This likely forged some sort of angst for Bob, who longed to have the same sort of tremendous fanfare for whenever he'd upload, like AVGN or those other guys who do the same thing. It could be argued that perhaps the reason he never reached the levels of other stars is because he lacks the work ethic to do so. The bulk of his commentary was done using basic black backgrounds and still images, with videos thrown in for good measure when applicable, but a majority of his videos felt like they were thrown together in an afternoon, if that. There was rarely a feeling of actual effort being put in beyond what we could see with the live-action segments, aside from those being cheesy and cringeworthy at best. If most of his workload was built around the live-action skits at this point, you know, the ones that showed him fumbling around and adjusting his gut, then what was the point of including his commentary in the video itself? I understand the idea of having a skit and making it a bumper-like storyline to accompany reviews. It gives some context for the video being made if you're willing to suspend belief, but it also keeps things somewhat exciting in case one topic gets a bit slow. But the commentary was supposed to be the backbone of the channel, and unfortunately it would largely take a back seat for the more focused home video style skits. This of course would later change and revert back to the commentary being the central point of focus, but it would return in the most lethargic and lackluster manner possible. But, given what we'll soon learn, perhaps the commentary being on the back burner wasn't exactly a bad thing. In fact, maybe it would have been better if he just continuously made his silly little lore segments instead of speaking his mind. It's not so much that he shouldn't be allowed to say what he's thinking about, but rather he doesn't understand where limits reside. When searching through his content, a video that stood out to me was Game Overthinker V50, War of the Thinkers. At this point, he had begun playing other characters, notably the Anti-Thinker, a satirized and stereotyped version of himself who was supposed to be the antithesis of analytic observation. While yes, this was tongue-in-cheek, I feel this is a proper representation of the battle that Mr. Chipman was experiencing on the inside. The Game Overthinker and MovieBob character was merely an exaggeration of himself, or it was supposed to be anyway, but it was a means to make a boisterous interpretation of how he normally thinks or acts to convey a humorous approach to the topic. The growth of his videos, as meager as it may have been compared to other channels, was enough for him to develop an ego. The Overthinker character was growing inside of him, mutating into a fragment of a personality that would shape the way he would act in the real world. The Anti-Thinker could be seen as the part of himself that is hostile or overly reactive, and in some ways likely mirrored rude commenters who would say impolite things under his uploads. Either way, this was a strange period for Bob, as not only was he figuring out the path of where he wanted to take his content, but also how far he wanted to go.
I'd stay down, Anti-Thinker. I am you, Chief. That's how it works, remember? I'm nothing like you. Oh, you don't think so? You don't think you ever lashed out? Don't think you ever spoke in anger?
With every passing video, his narration gradually got raunchier. He became more invested in trying to say offensive or bait-like statements to get people active in his comments, likely hoping to drum up some kind of pseudo-controversy through his opinions. You know, something along the lines of, "You won't believe what this guy said in his video. Let's share the vid and comment and tell him he's wrong." He wanted people to react to him in a way that would get him more attention. Clever on some levels, but it'd also attract the attention of people who would come to watch the eventual dumpster fire. Bob saw himself as a well-read deep thinker who'd figured out all of the angles and knew how to adequately argue his points. But despite this, his head was up in the clouds, unaware that he was slowly building up a set of walls around himself to eventually entomb his existence. The inevitable decline of his content would be compared to a cancerous growth, a tumor that was steadily swelling up and would be too hard to ignore soon enough. For whatever reason it may be, there are people who achieve some level of success in their professional endeavors and feel like they should share their wealth of knowledge with the masses. For Bob, this could easily be performed by writing his typical drivel on his blog or implementing more of his patented rhetoric in his videos, but he knew that the best way to properly convey his message was through the sale of books. That's right, Bob joined the ranks of other pseudo-intellectual assholes who feel the need to sell their ideas to you in written form. Now, out of everybody in the world who has taken the time to write down their experiences and their beliefs, would you really consider Bob to be somebody that's deserving of your time? Surely the guy whose online history has been built around complaining about other people and shittily reviewing video games and movies would have something truly thought-provoking to say, right? It'd be weird if all those years of commentating failed to build anything worth reading.
Buy my book!
Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book!
Well, it turns out that Bob has actually put out about 8 books, at least from what I can find. MovieBob's Superhero Cinema, MovieBob's Real Breakdown, MovieBob's Game Overthinker and Beyond, MovieBob's Idiot Box, MovieBob's Real Retro, MovieBob's Geek Streak, MovieBob's Strange Hollywood, Super Mario Bros. 3 Brick by Brick. The first 7 books are just his opinions on a variety of different factors of his life, and for whatever reason, he felt it necessary to make a series of books that we can pretty much guarantee will never be read to completion by anybody. In what world does a career gaming YouTuber think they'd have enough life experience to fill that many books? I'd argue that the only one that kinda stands out is Brick by Brick, because it functions as a partial retelling of the development of Mario Bros. 3, gives some personal anecdotes and first-hand accounts of playing the game, and features strategies to help you complete said experience. The idea itself is weird, but not inherently bad. It's just, MovieBob. If somebody with some discernible talent was to attempt to write this kind of book, perhaps it'd be more successful and maybe a touch endearing. If somebody's in the market for Mario game strategies, they'd likely consult an actual strategy guide or perhaps just use Google to satiate their needs. It basically just comes down to the point of, well, what the hell do I need this book for anyway? I suppose it could be argued that these stacks of printed paper were intended for his audience, but at the same time, what part of his audience wanted this? People tuning in for videos from their favorite creator would likely much rather watch or listen to something rather than read, but I don't know, maybe I'm being a little too nitpicky. The general consensus about his writing is that, well, he's pretty fucking awful at it. Painfully long run-on sentences, conversations and ideas that go literally nowhere, and surface-level observations about things he claims he's an expert on. Sometimes it's best not to spread yourself too thin, you know what I mean? Even if we play devil's advocate and say he's good at creating videos and blog posts, it doesn't mean he'll naturally be good at everything he tries his hand at. Granted, most of what he's produced in any real form has been widely disregarded as crap, but you get the idea. But this book did have some interesting excerpts. Allow me to read 2 of them for you. In my memories, the great console wars dragged on like my own private Vietnam, and it didn't help that I was still constantly in trouble at school and in and out of therapy at the time for anger, attention, and authority issues. However, it only really lasted a couple of years. And here's another. But the climactic reveal of Super Mario Bros. 3 is burned, no seared, into my memory the way JFK's assassination was for my parents' generation, or the way 9/11 would be for mine a scant 12 years from then. Am I alone in feeling like that's a really gross exaggeration? I do believe that part of Bob's problem is that he's tried to branch out in ways that he was clearly either too ill-equipped to do or was only half invested in. There's always been a weird disconnect with the things he's put together where it never really feels like he's truly passionate about what he's saying unless he's talking about politics. Because fuck yeah, who doesn't love getting serious beliefs jammed down their throat? I'd also like to take a moment to mention that, at the end of Bob's Mario 3 book, he mentions that his grandmother died, and instead of attending her funeral like a good grandson, he instead went out to purchase an air conditioner. I don't know what that has to do with Mario or Nintendo or really anything for that matter, but I'm glad that Bob made sure to put that at the end of his book. Imagine actually using his writing as a resource to help you complete the game, and then by the time you actually confront Bowser and rescue the princess, MovieBob has to bring down the good vibes to tell you about how his grandma fucking died. I just can't help but imagine that taking the wind out of the sails of Peach's safe return to the Mushroom Kingdom. Anybody that's closely followed Bob's antics online would have likely noticed his rhetoric and commentary had steadily started to include references to real-world politics, with discussions of what was going on in America. If you check his Game Overthinker blog, you can find some politically charged posts that happen to reveal his governmental, political, and economic beliefs. Now hear me out before we dive into this. I personally don't give a shit what your political opinions are, and I don't care about his, and you shouldn't care about anybody's either. Generally, anyway. All I will say is that I believe everybody should be treated fairly, given the opportunities to grow so long as they seize them, and that we should all find a way to get along despite differences. Now that's an idealized version of the world that we'll likely never get to live in, but it is what it is. I'm hoping not to see stupid arguments in the comments about either side's beliefs. Anyway, Bob made a colorful post in 2011 about Rainbow Six Patriot, a game that would ultimately never be released and was canned in favor of making Rainbow Six Siege. Let's read it, shall we? I have my well-documented issues with the mega popularity of the first-person shooter genre, but for the most part, it's centered around their part in the blanding up of the medium and the eventual devaluation of single-player experience. But there's a darker side of the whole phenomenon, namely that it's helped make the gaming medium a favorite new roost for the more despicable elements of America's political right wing. While the film and television industry, with some noteworthy exception, doggedly avoided serving up the kind of NRA empowerment vengeance porn that some audiences were clamoring for in the wake of 9/11, the games industry pretty much jumped in and said, let's do this. Neither Obama or even Bush could ever blast through enough craters in the Middle East to slake the voyeuristic bloodlust of Team Nugent. So modern warfare and the like have been filling the void, and reaping enthusiastic attaboys from Wingnut Nation for doing so. It's an unpleasant development from any angle, but thus far it's at least been one-sided. Sarah Palin's America may love military FPSs, but thus far military FPSs haven't been openly loving them back. Even Modern Warfare hedges its ideological bets by dropping a renegade American general bad guy into its asinine neo-Soviet Muslim Illuminati specter overarching conspiracy storyline. But that may be changing in the newest Tom Clancy branded shooter, Rainbow Six Patriots, which just ran a new trailer in the execrable VGAs, and in doing so revealed the new villains that you'll be blasting away at this time are Occupy Wall Street. Well, okay, not exactly. The bad guys are supposedly a homegrown terrorist militia called the Patriots, who are as miffed at the government as they are at corporate America. So the Sons of Liberty without all the cool robots and ninjas. But it's telling that this is the flavor they wanted for the big debut. It's an effective spot, to be sure, but it also carries an unmistakable implication that they've looked at the current zeitgeist and determined that their audience is more inclined to see the activist as potential terrorist and Wall Street as a threatened victim in the need of protection. Is their calculation correct? Does the Rainbow Six audience look at Occupy Wall Street and see American Al-Qaeda? I'll admit, it'd be less creepy without Clancy's name attached. If you only know his brand from the movies, you might not be aware of it, but Tom Clancy's stuff took a turn for right-wing fringe whack-jobbery a while ago, so it's not exactly a reach that his name would be on a Let's Blast the Hippies game, though I don't think he actually contributes to the content of the series anymore. So this is a funny topic because it shows just how out of touch Bob is with gaming, despite his claim to fame being that he reviews games and movies and all that other fun stuff that he apparently misinterprets. The topic of military-themed shooters being propaganda for the right-wing military-industrial complex and drone-striking machine is something that comes up every few years. It's a tired, worn-out, and frankly stupid argument that for some reason never dies. I mean, look at the current state of Call of Duty and just try to tell me that it's propaganda for anything other than consumerism. Bob has unfortunately subscribed to this ridiculous thought process, as he believes that games like COD and the now-cancelled Rainbow Six Patriots are essentially tools to get people fired up for war, as if quickscoping in Modern Warfare would somehow translate to somebody becoming a useful and tactically inclined soldier who can kill as many innocents in a third world country as their government demands. I'm sure there's people out there that were inspired to join their country's respective military because they played a lot of battlefields and have felt some level of patriotic fervor, but I'm pretty positive the number of folks who did that versus the amount of normal people that just played the games because they're fun and recognize the military setting as just an aesthetic for the game is probably astronomical. Most people that play video games want to play violent first-person shooters because they're, well, fun. Whether or not you find that to be a compelling genre is entirely up to you and your idea of a good time, but there's no reason to believe that video games are causing that much of an emotional push to get people enlisting. That logic is just a few steps removed from people that want to blame gun violence on video games. But hey, there's so much more to go over, so why don't I read part of yet another article? I'd like to spend all day engaging people about this, but the fact is I have a shit ton of deadline-driven work to do that's only going to get done if I go media dark for a few hours. So this will have to be all from me about the big Obama gun laws speech today. I imagine the number one thing anyone wants to hear from me is how I feel about the president calling for more research into violent video games as part of his big set of plans and proposals. Honestly, I hated hearing it. It cuts me to the bone when otherwise intelligent, reasonable people I happen to support have to jump and join that particular political dance, especially when I strongly suspect that they're better than that. I would prefer that the president had said, quote, "Some have called for the attention paid to a link between violent video games or movies and gun deaths, but the fact is that research has already been done 100 times over and the link quite simply does not exist, and continuing to call for it distracts from the real issue, which is guns and the obscene power of the gun lobby. The fact is, enough of my fellow Americans are paranoid enough, either through their own deficiencies or because they lack the necessary clarity and intellectual confidence to not be swayed by the propaganda of the NRA and their ilk, to give real traction to the meme of Obama/Democrats coming to take all the guns. One that only gets stronger if said propagandists can claim that they and their issue is being singled out. That they and their issue should be singled out is beside the point. Singling out sounds bad. Thus was Joe Biden obliged to invite representatives of the movie and game industry. Why not books? Oh right, old older, out-of-touch people aren't scared or confused by books to his various summits, even though he's smart enough to know that the link doesn't exist. In order to affect the image that guns and gun rights weren't alone in being called to the principal's office, and thus is Obama obliged to name-check some illusory need for violent video games research, even though he's smart enough to know better and savvy enough to know that even if he did buy into, for example, the desensitization fallacy, actually making moves that even smelled of censorship would lose he and his party their crucial support among Gen X and Y voters. But here's the rub. Calling for more research in Washington speak translates to we pretty much guarantee nothing will come of this. It is, quite simply, a smokescreen, a way for the president and his allies to appear to take the broader solution nonsense seriously while they get about the real business of breaking back the gun lobby in order to make US gun laws slightly more sane. That's a lot of words being used to essentially argue against his mindset from his previous post. I agree that video games are not the cause of violence in the world. It's an argument that doesn't make any sense and doesn't deserve any merit. But how is it that he's able to stick his chest out and claim that video games can't be the catalyst for bad things happening, but meanwhile they can be part of a propaganda machine that's designed to con young people into enlisting into the military and eventually firing weapons at insurgents? Are you guys getting what I'm saying here? I know, it's a broad argument that requires more nuance than someone like myself could ever dream of having, but I find it interesting that he thinks that video games can lead to violence in one way but not the other. When games are the topic of citizen-on-citizen violence, it's total nonsense because games are just entertainment. But when the topic of nation-on-nation violence is brought up, now it's suddenly a tool that can be used to rewire a person's brain to make them comfortable with the idea of mass murder. Please, for the love of God, make it make sense.
Hello, I'm the Game Overthinker. Why am I outside at this lovely pond? Well, funny you should ask. This is my PlayStation 3 Solidarity walking around time. Yeah, you see, I've been feeling bad as someone who doesn't own a PlayStation 3 for all of my friends who do, who've had all their game time cut in half by the recent PS3 blackout. So in solidarity, I decided to make it a point every day to go out, walk around, and spend some time not gaming in order to show solidarity with them. Why would I still be doing this months after the blackout has already ended? Well, you think of another reason for a cold open on this lovely pond.
Okay, I'm almost done beating you over the head with this guy's older post, but let's endure one more, okay? There's been a meme going around talk radio and the right-wing blogosphere for about a year now that video games, or rather military FPS games, are becoming the #1 entertainment for patriotic Americans, replacing the output of liberal Hollywood. I'm calling bullshit on this one. Details in the video. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% satisfied with how this one came out. The 10-minute time limit on YouTube meant that I had to speed up the sound more than I would have liked to. And while it means I got out what I wanted to in terms of words, I'm concerned that it undercuts some of the more serious matters I'm stumbling around swatting at with a wiffle bat. Overall, I think it's as good as I can make it within current circumstances, and the important thing is I think the point gets across. It's not so much that I have a problem with the idea of video games having a conservative and/or pro-war political bent, I just happen to think those propping up this whole notion are grasping at straws and damaging the medium as a result. The subject matter has been on my to-do list since before episode 1, but I've been hesitant to jump into politics too early. This is meant to be about the culture surrounding a hobby, not a political machine, and if you get into politics before establishing a broader identity, you risk getting pigeonholed as a liberal commentator or a right-wing game rant guy, which can turn off a lot of people unnecessarily. For what it's worth, I'm generally libertarian-leaning independent. I loathe Hillary Clinton. I find Obama's cheesy tent survival shtick insufferable even though he seems like a nice fella otherwise. I admire the hell out of John McCain and voted for him in the Republican primary. But I'm against unnecessarily prolonging the Iraq War, plus I've nothing but contempt for the current administration. Make of that what you will. Why does he care if political commentators are jokingly referring to military FPS titles as some kind of prime entertainment for people of their affiliation? Why does it matter? Even if it wasn't a joke, it'd still be a pointless observation. Most young to middle-aged adults have played or do actively play FPS games. So what? Their politics mean nothing. Am I supposed to assume that only left-leaning liberal women and gays play The Sims? Does the right play Katamari? Where does Leisure Suit Larry fall politically? This is the type of shit that keeps me up late at night. I'm sorry, Bob's thought process was turning my brain into dog shit. Another interesting point of this article is how Bob claims that he doesn't want to be known as some kind of news or politics channel, instead he'd rather discuss the culture of video games. I get his mindset and I can't blame him for wanting to avoid hot-button issues, but that requires him to not talk about those issues in any way, shape, or form, not even tangentially. The only way he could ever possibly be seen as some kind of political nut is if he tries to force-feed his audience his views on the state of developed governments. The irony of this is almost palpable, but I'm sure there's not a single way in hell this will somehow come back to bite him in the ass, right?
I was fucking shell-shocked and horrified and disturbed by the election. of a fucking game show host.
Bob's left-leaning libertarianism would only become more intense as time would move forward. As while it had a slow but steady leakage into his videos, it mostly quickly affected his direct social media accounts, such as his Twitter profile. Over the years, he said some truly backwards and bizarre things, but this isn't too uncommon online. People tend to experience a bit of gusto when they can hide behind a screen name and share their spicy opinions, but usually even the dumbest folk are smart enough to use an innocuous screen name, or they're so idiotic and unread that they get ignored by most people, even if they're silly enough to use their real name on their profile. Instead of going the usual route of adopting a new, seemingly unfamiliar alias to give him an avenue to spew his political rhetoric, Bob opted to use his social media pages, under his own MovieBob branding mind you, to say some truly delusional shit. Sometimes it's hateful things that make you question his sanity, and other times it's clueless quotes that go nowhere. At a certain point, people of vision and intelligence need to reassert power in this country. We should not slide into the abyss because a plurality of the citizenry is too fucking stupid to not want to prevent it. Oh wow, Bob. Stupid people do stupid things and smart people do smart things? Intelligence good, stupid bad? Holy shit, I never would have come to that conclusion myself. Granted, your way of saying it is so wordy that it makes me blush, but still, what a brilliant little nugget of, well, I struggle to see it as wisdom, but it's something alright. Boy, and what about his astute observation about brain versus brawn? I'm sure the guy whose gut hangs over his belt while huffing his own farts about his political beliefs will have unbiased, totally reasonable things to say. There won't be a lick of moral superiority in any form, right? These are the people still living in a pre-mechanization mindset, looking at backwards hyper-masculine expressions of strength as real power. The best day that will ever happen to humanity will be the moment when physical strength becomes meaningless, and intellectual worth and creative vision become the only true measures of a human being to be considered. That's the superior future. I don't know, man. Unless artificial intelligence comes for even the most basic of jobs like digging ditches, it's safe to assume that a rough set of hands will always be more reputable than some dainty plastic-pushing fingers. Bob has a strange hatred for any level of masculinity, and as such, not only does he have issues with how masculine stuff has affected human cultures, but he has even expressed his disdain for masculine media. Think back to when he was shit-talking games that were different from his childhood, all of the edgy stuff that he was taking a stand against. Those games across the board had a masculine vibe about them and focused on, you guessed it, masculine leads. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's also nothing wrong with games that are anything but masculine. But the pattern in his beliefs and his preferences has caused me to conclude that Bob is a little, against guys stuff. But hoo boy, does it get ever angstier. It's not even a word, you get the idea. Check this crap out. 2019. I was supposed to be on a starship by now, conversing with intelligent robots, deciding what sort of body I'd like to upload my immortal consciousness into. Instead, we're all still on this fucking rock, wondering how to placate the white working class. I'll never forgive the troglodytes who stole the future I earned to prolong their worthless existence. Progress isn't a constant upward climb, sadly. Plus, a better age may be better manifest out of the darkness. I'm out of patience. There's no worth in the backward people. They could all be Thanos from existence tomorrow, and we'd lose not a single person of value or decency. There's no separation on shades between the ignorant and the wicked. I can't help but feel like blaming the working class for anything other than trying to survive each disaster they find themselves in is, well, out of order. And what does it matter what their race is? It shouldn't matter what the color of their skin is, but rather what they stand for or what they're working toward. Change takes time, and people that are just trying to get by shouldn't be shit on just for that. I mean, I guess there's nothing wrong with trying to stop somebody from being a cynical prick, but is it really necessary either? Reading posts like this, I'm left wondering if Bob has any understanding of the type of clown he makes himself out to be. It'd be one thing if he studied politics and history, if he had a firm grasp on everything encompassing that topic and then put that knowledge to good use in his content, like creating documentaries or providing commentary on certain events, but that just isn't the case. Bob Chipman likes to spend his time watching movies and playing video games, and in between his sporadic lackluster reviews, he's pushing out warm steamers disguised as deep diplomatic understanding. Hell, Bob even got loosely involved in the old Gamergate fiasco of the mid-2010s. Remember that shit? Somehow no side came out looking good and it ultimately turned out to be a big clusterfuck of angry emotions and yelling. If you wanted to spend an afternoon scrolling through furious posts regardless of political affiliation, there was no greater time to be a drama-loving observer. Bob was on the side of the fence that saw the entire debacle as a misogynistic campaign fueled by angry white male gamers. I don't know, and I also don't really care. But the point is that Bob was pretty outspoken here, and even incorporated his beliefs into a Game Overthinker video where he, of course, had to shoehorn his skits to make the video feel like a bigger product. when the topic was about Gamergate.
The state of mind you have to put yourself in, not just to win a fight or an argument, but obliterate the other side, is just not compatible with civilized life outside of that setting. And it feels like too many gamers never figured out that the tools you use to fight a war, even one against censorship, just aren't the same tools you use to win an argument, or even just interact with other humans in the regular non-wartime world. That's where the backlash against Arnita Sarkeesian and feminist or social justice criticism in games in general seem to come from. Guys who never managed to learn that Jack Thompson saying these games cause violence, so let's ban them, and someone else saying these games reinforce systemic societal sexism or racism, maybe we should think about that, aren't even close to the same thing and cannot be met with the same response.
Again, it's whatever, it's his channel and he can post whatever he wants, but he mostly focused on game and movie reviews or analyzing parts of said media. And this deep dive into more controversial beliefs is a strange direction to take his content. It's tangentially related to gaming, but were the skits necessary? Did they help sell his arguments any better? I've got to assume it never benefited his posts. In what world would that make any sense? Now, I'm personally of the belief that while Bob is unusual and certainly doesn't mix well with others, he's quite harmless. Out of the many strange folks you'll find online, especially those who talk about video games from sunrise to sunset, he's arguably one of the least offensive people in this niche. Lots of dudes in his shoes would start doing obtuse things to women and making scenes in public spaces, but he was a touch more focused in trying to run his business and engage in networking. You know, all of those really important parts of trying to succeed in entertainment. For example, Bob has gone to many conventions during this time, and part of this type of get-together is taking photos with notable figures. A lot of the time, you have to exchange some of your paper money to get them to even consider putting their arm around your disgusting shoulder for a picture. But sometimes people are considerate and will take a quick snapshot with you because they're trying to be friendly, or because of, again, networking. MovieBob desperately wants to be considered one of the pillars of YouTube commentary, and managed to track down Lindsay Ellis during one of these innumerable conventions that he attended, living in some form of infamy given the back-and-forth battles the internet has harbored regarding feminist ideals. Bob, viewing himself as a staunch feminist ally, opted to track her down to get her to take a selfie with him. Harmless, right? Nothing quite unusual there. What made this entire thing questionable was how he would later try to use the photo as a means to sell the idea that he was close personal friends with Lindsay. You know, because they happened to take a photo together. On November 10th, 2020, a Twitter thread was created talking about being in a group chat with work peers and how that can translate to being friends with them. Bob was not initially part of this discussion, moseying his way into the conversation with a photo of himself with Lindsay. Allow me to read this exchange for you. Even if what they said is true, what's wrong with having a group chat laughing my ass off like it's not some secret nefarious thing? I have group chats, it's nice to have a place to talk to friends. I know, right? I've uncovered the conspiracy of people being friends with their peers. I, for one, am positively shocked. This is honestly really inappropriate and creepy, dude. A selfie at a con several years ago does not mean we are friends. Also, the fact I have soft-blocked you like 6 times and you always refollow is creepy. Take the hint, and please leave me alone. Why would MovieBob try to insert himself into a conversation that not only was he not a part of, but also had no stake in, period? I've taken photos with people before. It certainly doesn't mean I'm their close friend or anything like that. It's a social interaction that has become increasingly more common as people have adopted smartphones in the last 20 or so years. It's strange that Bob would want to pair up with Lindsay because outside of her supposed successes in advertising and advocating for feminist ideology, she's purportedly been a very bad friend to people who have had the misfortune of being around her. Bob chose to ignore all of this because he saw a pretty lady who was on his side of the political spectrum, so nothing else quite mattered. After Lindsay told him to stop making things weird, Bob started to sad post on his Twitter profile, upset that he wasn't able to conjure up a friendship just because he's notorious online. People began to clown on him for making a fool of himself yet again, and the cycle just continued to repeat. Some even took issue with Lindsay, with them suggesting that her trying to set boundaries between her and what Bob was trying to insinuate was a bad thing. I'm not planning to say anything further publicly here on Twitter about what I imagine many people want to ask me about, other than to say I feel deeply hurt, confused, and borderline gaslighted, but that I won't push for explanations, as that might invite irritation. On November 12th, Lindsay made a post giving her side of the situation, opting to totally remove herself from the entire problem by blocking Bob and calling it a day. All things considered, she has every right to be upset with how Bob tried to rope her into some kind of forced fake friendship. Regardless of how you feel about her topics, I think we can all agree that it's totally fair for her to not want to be around somebody, and she has every right to tell Bob to stop being weird. Getting a tiny bit sick of people calling me a harassment-enabling hypocrite for publicly calling out a man who has made me uncomfortable for years, all while he tried to create an image that we have some sort of connection or relationship when there is none. I am not about to accept responsibility for any dog piles that happen as a result of me having to publicly tell him to leave me alone, and to stop projecting to his audience that we have some form of relationship. I unfollowed him years ago because of how toxic he is. I slept on it a full 24 hours before I had decided how to handle it. Even blocking him wasn't going to stop him from broadcasting to the world this delusion that he and I are friends, and I want it to be public that I don't condone the things he says. No, it's not okay. I don't think he was trying to be weird or malicious with what he was doing, but rather he lacked the social tact to understand that what he was doing was bordering on being creepy. There's certainly far worse things he could have done, but still, he made a fool of himself, and that's worth mentioning. If you hadn't figured it out by this point, MovieBob is a huge ass-kisser for Nintendo. One of those apologists that'll mindlessly worship the ground that they walk on because they used to consistently put out fun games and that made his fat little childhood bearable. The earliest archive instance of his fanboyism can be found on his old AOL homepage for MST Mario, the alias he used when he was just a wee little 15-year-old babby. Right off the bat, at the top of the page, young Bobby was giving out some pretty sensitive information, such as his full name, date of birth, the town and state he lived in, his email address, his marital status, and what have you. Most of his page was dedicated to explaining how much he loves Nintendo and delineating on the impact that their games had on his life. You know, alongside detailing his affinity for anime like the filthy fucking weeb he is. I suppose a massive geek being into Japanese cartoons shouldn't be surprising, but I'll always take any chance I get to denounce anybody for liking something that's harmless. Anybody who enjoys the things that I don't like is my mortal enemy. The only thing that Bob takes more seriously than his reputation or his staunch views on politics is his love for Nintendo, which is a trait that has followed him long into adulthood. It's totally acceptable to be a Nintendo fan. I don't see any reason to admonish somebody because they enjoy the games that Nintendo has put out over the years, at least if it's the stuff they used to produce. It's no secret that Nintendo has fallen far from grace and has more or less turned into a shambling husk of its former self. I won't lie to you, there are quite a few Nintendo games that I hold close to my heart, such as Luigi's Mansion, Mario Sunshine, Mario Bros. 3, Chibi Robo, Brawl, you get the idea. If I'm feeling nostalgic or maybe I'm down in the dumps, I can boot up an emulator and relive the classics from my childhood that always bring a smile to my face, and I'm sure that Bob gets the same sort of thrill out of playing entries from his favorite franchises as well. While you and I and most other people can separate ourselves from our interests, Bob is unfortunately incapable of escaping his allegiance to a gaming company. Bob has used the influence of Nintendo's games to brandish his videos with their intellectual properties, particularly Mario. In fact, one of the most widely known images of Bob is him in a Mario costume. This was actually my first introduction to Mr. Chipman, at least I think. This photograph is arguably the most groundbreaking contribution he's made to the internet, for better or for worse. I can only hope that when he inevitably bites the dust, this legendary picture will be used for his memorial post.
Well, I think that was very well said.
Well, thank you, Strawman. You know, it gets kind of lonely out here. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yes, I'm very, very upset about all these recent changes and shakeups to the show's format.
Gee, I never could have predicted you'd react that way, talking pile of straw who repeats easily refutable versions of arguments I disagree with.
Being such a die-hard fan of the fine works of Nintendo, he was a subscriber to the ever-popular Nintendo Power magazine until December 2012. I too used to be subscribed to this illustrious magazine, so I feel as though I can relate to Bob on that front. Who doesn't like having a bit of reading material waiting for them in the bathroom? Some of my most informative reads have occurred while my cheeks were firmly pressed against my crapper seat. But I really can't say that Nintendo Power really ever had a lasting imprint on me, and I also can't imagine why it would be that important to anybody else. Nintendo Power wasn't even the first gaming magazine to debut, and honestly, the only thing I can truly recall being so unique about it was the covers, at least early on. Sure, they got previews of upcoming titles, but one magazine in the same niche didn't. Picking your flavor of magazine was about the same as picking your console. Each thing more or less provided the same service, but there were small, minute changes that set the publication apart. Not enough to warrant caring, but still something nonetheless. Bob likely cherishes these books because they're A, part of his childhood, and B, a product that was attached to Nintendo. By the time Nintendo Power had gone the way of the dodo, news sources were rapidly moving to electronic venues, as printing ink on paper had gradually become less popular over the years. Some of the creators we mentioned before, such as AVGN, had put out videos that celebrated the history of said magazine, highlighting the good points from various issues and generally showcasing the quality that was there to behold for a magazine of all things. Bob had an opportunity to reflect on the past of the collections of paper he loved so much, and rather than dissect what made them so special with his own brand of supposed wit, he instead had a 12 or so minute long moment of silence. I'm not even joking. I would argue that's a hell of a lot longer than a moment, but I'm more concerned with the fact that gaming journalism in any form warranted a moment of silence. Like, dude, it was a magazine that talked about games. The one thing more important than reading about games is actually fucking playing them. So go have fun with the products you enjoyed as a kid. Why have an emotional episode about something that is used to advertise said games? Bob must really love consuming. As people began to take notice of Bob's increasingly hostile nature, his audience began to feel unsure of his antics. One portion of his audience held out their support for Bob because they remembered all of the good days of his career, the golden age when he was still saying stupid things about games and movies rather than droning on about the real world. Another section thought that the change was great, but this was a very small minority, and the last chunk was set on criticizing Bob's newfound governmental angle for his online presence. Bob had been let go from Screw Attack around the time he really started to get in on the Gamergate drama. Screw Attack was very careful with how they approached the topic, stating that his dismissal was not based on his political beliefs. But anybody with a functioning brain can see that his constituents were becoming quite familiar with his behavior and likely wanted to keep their respective incomes safe from whatever disaster was barreling right toward Bob. Photos were circulating online that showed Bob chumming it up with enemies of the internet like Anita Sarkeesian, who was the supposed brain behind feminist frequency, and pushed a bullshit narrative that all gaming is sexist, racist, and homophobic. And, she robbed her backers of their investing money for a video series for her cause that she wasted by creating videos that didn't have any actual credible claims against the gaming industry. Sure, she managed to make games safer in quotations, but sexual assault is still happening in the business behind the scenes. But at least virtual women are safe. Anyway, Bob has this weird thing where he always takes the side of women. And before anybody tries to grab my nuts and hold them over a roaring fire, hear me out. I'm not saying that all women are stupid and shouldn't be taken seriously. However, I'm saying that he tends to side with women because they're women. It never has anything to do with their rhetoric, their ideas, their beliefs regarding certain topics, none of that. Their appearance alone is all it takes for him to immediately jump ship and back them up on whatever topic they may be a part of. Why is it that, when it comes to men that obsess over women, there's more or less two camps? One that fucking hates women for whatever reason, and the one that mindlessly sucks their asses clean for no reason. And usually these guys are ogres that no women in their right mind would even consider sleeping with, regardless of side. Sorry ladies, those freaks used to be the burden of men, and now they're your problem. Enjoy! Bob had gradually stripped himself of any whimsy that he may have had as an adult, and in some ways it's actually kind of depressing. He initially started out as a guy who, while unusually staunch on his views, at least tried to make people feel at ease by doing creative or goofy things to ramp up the entertainment value of his work. He understood at the time that people like being able to let loose and allow a piece of media to make them feel good, and instead of continuing to follow that goal, he's turned his channel into a propaganda machine. He will always take any opportunity to spread the word of his ideology when and where he can. Does a movie or game feature some vaguely left-leaning motifs? Better believe he's there to reinforce those ideas and then supplement anything missing with his own unusual takes on the topic. What about if there's a scent of masculinity or something right-leaning, or even more centered? Doesn't matter. He's gonna shit on it for being that way while once again reaffirming that his beliefs are better for the 100th time. It's safe to assume that at this point, if somebody is coming to his content and sticking around for any reason beyond watching him wallow in obscurity, it's likely because they have the same political beliefs as him. To put it simply, he's turned his hobby into an echo chamber for other similarly thinking adults. Now that Bob had found himself in an entirely new market, despite being seemingly unaware that he more or less isolated himself from the audience that got him any modicum of fame that he had prior, Bob took to ruminating. Instead of trying to be funny or discover a new way to make his videos more engaging for his audience, he just aimlessly posts to Twitter, and now Blue Sky. Like all stable and collected adults, Bob needs a place where he can freely share all of the stupidest things that are floating around in his mind. Not only did he feel it necessary to shit up his videos with virtue signaling, but why not go ahead and take his social media accounts and make them into a place where he can safely exclaim his nonsensical crap? Who doesn't want to have other similarly deluded people kiss their ass until it's raw? I know I do. At this moment, he's locked his Twitter account, so I can't go in and see every new dumb post that he makes, so I'm going to have to make do with the plentiful archives that are available online. And unfortunately, his Blue Sky just isn't that interesting. I guess Bob had to bunker down because he received too much backlash for advocating for the death of people that made the mistake of thinking differently than him. I'm dead serious. Bob absolutely hates anybody whose politics don't align with his. It's fine to have disagreements about things like that, and it's healthy to want to discuss said differences so you can better understand people and why they think the way they do. Everybody is entitled to their opinions, even if those opinions suck hairy balls. He's got a lot in common with Patrick Tomlinson in this regard. If you happen to make a post that doesn't make him feel the warm fuzzies in his tummy, he'll quote tweet you and try his best to dismantle whatever argument you may have, while simultaneously acting like a sensitive pussy about it. Bob, much like Patrick, will talk down to anybody he feels deserves it, rather than initially giving people any level of respect. He can't even fake some kind of bullshit care for other people. If you want your beliefs to be taken seriously, you need to be able to have a healthy conversation regarding what you care about. You should never immediately rush to ad hominem attacks, which I know is hilarious coming from me, and instead should want to have a dialogue about things. But I guess that just makes too much sense. It's far easier to disregard the beliefs of others when they happen to contradict yours. And again, I have to stress that I don't hold the belief that he's a political nut because he's a lefty, but rather he's allowed his political affiliation to consume his entire personality. There's bad people on both sides of the fence, and guaranteed there's some shitheads in the center too. Nobody should allow their party to convince them to eradicate their own individuality. People should not feel it necessary to sacrifice their own person just so they can please others who have the same viewpoints. At some level, you just have to be you know? But alas, people like this rarely come to their senses. Human beings are incredibly impressionable creatures, and it doesn't take much to get somebody to be ride or die for a cause, so long as they feel like their needs are being met. Sometimes, all it takes to make someone throw away their identity is to claim that you or something you're trying to peddle to them will fill in all of the gaps in their life. You'd be shocked how many people are willing to experience some kind of escapism. Bob's audience was starting to shift away from him, and even the fictional characters that he idolized had to step in and tell him that they don't fuck with him. I think it can be argued that while Bob certainly tried to do something unique, he ultimately didn't do anything new. He was not the first to review games or movies in a commentary format, and he was also not the first person to be an open Nintendo fan to a fault. He never did anything first, which one would assume would put him at a disadvantage for getting clicks online. But this was actually a good opportunity for him to analyze what made his contemporaries so successful, and how he could apply himself to achieve similar or better results. This didn't guarantee that he'd be a big winner. I mean, look at how he's doing right now. But the chance for him to really strike the iron while it was hot was right there, and he never even seized it. All things considered, he's a functional man. He pays his bills and taxes. He speaks his mind, and manages a semi-operational business to the best of his ability. That's arguably better than most people on the internet, and for somebody who gets dogged on for how much of a dork he is, he's done pretty well for himself. It really is just a shame that he's allowed his judgment to get clouded with political hysteria and hateful rhetoric. If you check what he puts out today, there's an apparent lack of soul in his content. Gone are the days of the cringy skits and biting commentary, as we're left with a man who was just completing the technical process of talking into a microphone or a camera and making videos. The fire in his belly has long since gone out. It could be argued that he's a much older man and perhaps his principles have changed. Maybe he feels like he doesn't need to be outlandish to get the attention of onlookers. But I think it's safe to say that Bob's presentation has worn him down to a nub. While yes, people have made unpleasant comments about him and to him on a regular basis, and that's surely put a damper on his drive to put out more videos, he still could have adapted to the market. There's always going to be nasty people out there that want to hurt your feelings, but all you can do is pull your pants up and learn to either not care or to fix whatever's bringing you so much ire. If Bob focused on reviewing games and movies while trying to be entertaining, rather than simplifying his uploads and spending hours at a time arguing politics on Twitter, we would likely see an entirely different outcome for him. I think it's safe to assume that maybe he would have built up a healthy enough audience to more than sustain his work. There are people out there that genuinely enjoy what he puts out, and if they feel like they're getting enough out of his uploads, then God bless. But it's hard to deny that Bob isn't the same energetic butterball that he was all those years ago. The glimmer in his eye, while shielded by his sunglasses, has mostly burnt out, and all that remains is the ash of a fire that once roared from the depths of his belly to the top of his head. Bob is another example of the expansive list of people that have invested all of their efforts towards integrating with the internet, only for the web to chew them up and shit them out in worse condition than when they entered. I don't see Bob going anywhere or changing his content for the better, and odds are he'll be doing this in his elder years. While I do somewhat admire his commitment to the bit, I can't help but wonder what else is here for him if the money has dried up as much as it appears that it has. I don't hate the guy. I'm certainly not a fan of his videos, but he's earned his spot online. He'll always be on the receiving end of criticism, but I'd argue that the internet needs people just like Bob. There always has to be people that act as lightning rods for attacks or criticism or what have you. It doesn't make it right, but that's how things are, and in the end, Bob will be just fine. Largely forgotten, but he'll be alright. But that being said, that's going to be it for today's video. If you like what I do, leave a comment, rate, and subscribe. If you want to support me in a more personal way, you can check out the Patreon link and the Teespring link in the description. I've also got a Newgrounds account if art stuff is your thing. I've got more content coming down the pipeline. But until then, I'll see you degenerates next time.